Slide, please. The Assyrian Empire came to an end when Nineveh fell before the combined onslaught of the invaders. At that time, the commander of the Assyrian army made himself king of Babylon. Under him and his successors, the ancient city had a final brief flowering between 612 and 539 BC, before it was conquered by the Persians. Slide, please. Whereas the Assyrians had used carved stone slabs, the Neo-Babylonians, who were farther removed from the sources of such slabs, substituted baked and glazed brick. This technique, too, had been developed in Assyria, but now is used on a far larger scale, both for surface ornament and architectural detail. Slide, please. The stately procession of bulls, dragons, and other animals of molded brick within a framework of vividly colored ornamental bands has a grace and gaiety far removed from the ponderous guardian monsters of the Assyrians. Slide, please. Here, for the last time, we sense again that special genius of ancient Mesopotamian art for the portrayal of animals, which has been noted since early dynastic times. Slide, please. Clear the machine.
We will have a review now of the two cultures that we have studied so far. As I've mentioned, we will do basically sort of division of three areas of the architecture of the country, the sculpture, and then the decorative arts, which would include jewelry, furniture, paintings, etc. In the Egyptian culture, you had two basic types of architecture. You had the pyramids in the Old Kingdom, and then the temples, which were for the use of only a very select few. They were massive things, and you have also the tombs later on, like carved into the sides of the cliffs, like the tomb of Ramesses and Queen Hatshepsut. But you have the surfaces covered with hieroglyphics. The type of construction was post and lintel. In other words, they built up two columns and placed a lintel across it that would support the roof. Slide, please. Then in their sculpture, the Egyptians carried, especially in the stone sculpture, basically stayed close to the form. In the lesser sculptures, when they got into wood, there was some addition of arms or movement. But you have the stylization of, especially the facial features, especially with the makeup that they use. You have a fairly rigid body that is static in space. Slide, please. And then also in the tomb paintings, or in their decorative things, they used earth pigments to color the tones. The people were fairly flat. They had many times a profile, the body full face, to make sure that all arms and legs, all parts of the body, would be shown. And then hieroglyphics, or the story of the pharaohs, would fill all the empty space around the subject. Slide, please. In the Mesopotamian culture, you don't have any of the architecture left. As I said, the ziggurats, or the high peaks, were made out of mud or clay bricks and have disintegrated over the centuries. So you have basically sculpture. It has been noted that usually the more ferocious a culture is, the more delicate their artwork is. And the more passive or peaceful a culture seems to be, the more violent their artwork seems to become. And certainly as violent as the Mesopotamian cultures, the Assyrians, the Sumerians, the Babylonians, were, the decorative elements on their artwork are beautifully, delicately portrayed. such as in this, the sort of knitted cap of Gadbois shows sort of the curls of each little individual knitted knot. The highly stylized presentation of the eyebrows in a very delicate sort of herringbone pattern. And then the Gadbois always had his hands sort of clasped, not in our prayerful position, but in their prayerful position, of sort of overlapping, the palms cupped in front of each other at chest level. Slide, please. And then the ferociousness of the man beast, but again, with this decorative repeating pattern in the elements of their sculptural work. Slide, please. And then also another art form was the glazed tile reliefs that were clay tiles, clay bricks, and each of them were sculpted in a relief pattern that would stick out from the flat surface, and then they were glazed. And like anything fired and glazed, the color has been retained for over the centuries, and they're bright and colorful. Slide, please. Clear the machine.
May I have your attention, please? This tape is on Aegean art, Aegean. Put in the first slide, please. If we sail from the Nile Delta northwestward across the Mediterranean, our first glimpse of Europe will be the eastern tip of Crete. Beyond it, we find a scattered group of small islands, the Cyclades, and a little farther on, the mainland of Greece. This facing the coast of Asia Minor across the Aegean Sea. Slide, please. To archaeologists, Aegean is not merely a geographical term. They have adopted it to designate the civilizations that flourished in this area during the 3rd and the 2nd millenniums BC, before the development of Greek civilization proper. There are 3 of these, closely interrelated yet distinct from each other. That of Crete, C-R-E-T-E, called Minoan, after the legendary Cretan king Minos. That of the small islands north of Crete, the Cycladic, and that of the Greek mainland, the Helladic. Each of them in turn has been divided into 3 phases, early, middle, and late, which correspond roughly to the Old, Middle, and New Kingdom in Egypt. Slide, please. 100 years ago, Aegean civilization was known to us only from Homer's account of the Trojan War and the Iliad. The earliest excavations during the 1870s and in Crete shortly before 1900 were undertaken to test the factual core of these tales. Slide, please. But our knowledge of Aegean civilization even now is very much more limited than our knowledge of Egypt or the ancient Near East. Its forms, although linked to both Egypt and the Near East on the one hand and to the later Greek art on the other, are no mere transition between these 2 worlds. They have a haunting beauty of their own that belongs to neither. Among the many strange qualities of Aegean art, perhaps the most puzzling is its air of freshness and spontaneity, which makes us forget how little we know of its meaning. Slide, please. The people who inhabited the Cycladic islands, C-Y-C-L-A-D-I-C, between about 2600 and 1100 BC, have left hardly any trace apart from their modest stone tombs. The things they buried with their dead are remarkable in one respect only. They include a large number of marble idols of a peculiarly impressive kind. Almost all of them represent a standing nude female figure with arms folded across the chest, presumably the mother and fertility goddess. Slide, please. They also share a distinctive shape which at first glance recalls the angular, abstract qualities of primitive sculpture. The flat, wedge shape of the body, the strong columnar neck, and the tilted oval shield of the face featureless except for the long ridge-like nose. Slide, please. The longer we study this piece, the more we come to realize that its qualities can only be described as elegant and sophisticated. Slide, please. What an extraordinary feeling for the organic structure of the body there is in the delicate curves of the outline, in the hints of convexity marking the knees and abdomen. Slide, please. Even if we discount its deceptively modern look, the figure seems a bold departure from anything we have seen before. Slide, please. Minoan, M-I-N-O-A-N, civilization is by far the richest as well as the strangest of the Aegean world. Slide, please. In surveying the main achievements of Minoan art, we cannot really speak of growth or development. They appear and disappear so abruptly that their fate must have been determined by external forces, such as violent changes affecting the entire island. Of these changes we know little or nothing, and yet the character of Minoan art, which is gay, even playful, and full of rhythmic motion, conveys no hints of such threats. Slide, please. They created not only their own system of writing, but an urban civilization as well, centering on several great palaces. At least 3 of them were built in short order. Hardly anything is left today of this southern spurt of large-scale building activity, for the 3 palaces were all destroyed at the same time, about 1700 BC. And after an interval of 100 years, new and even larger structures began to appear on the same sites, only to suffer destruction in their turn about 1500 BC. It is these new palaces that are our main source of information on Minoan architecture. Slide, please. The one at Knossos, so-called the Palace of Minos, was the most ambitious, covering a vast territory and composed of so many rooms that it survived in Greek legend as the labyrinth of the Minotaur. It has been carefully excavated and partly restored. We cannot recapture the appearance of the building as a whole, but we can assume that the exterior did not look impressive compared to Assyrian or Persian palaces. There was no striving for unified monumental effect. The individual units are generally rather small and the ceilings are low. Slide, please. Nevertheless, the numerous porticos, staircases, and air shafts must have given the palace a pleasantly open, airy quality. And some of the interiors, with their richly decorated walls, retain their atmosphere of intimate elegance to this very day. Slide, please. The masonry construction of Minoan palaces is excellent throughout, but the columns were always of wood. Although none have survived, their characteristic form, the smooth shaft tapering downward, topped by a wide, cushion-shaped capital, is known from representations in painting and sculpture. Slide, please. Who were the rulers that built these palaces? They were not warrior princes, since no fortifications have been found anywhere in Minoan Crete, and military subjects are almost unknown in Minoan art. Since shipping and trade formed an important part of Minoan economic life, perhaps the king should be viewed as the head of a merchant aristocracy. Slide, please. The religious life of Minoan Crete is even harder to define than the political or the social order. Its chief deity or deities was female, akin to the mother and fertility goddesses that we have encountered before. Religious subjects in Minoan art are few in number and of uncertain significance. Terracotta statuettes of around 1600 BC from Knossos may represent the goddess in one of her several identities. One of them shows her with 3 long snakes wound around her arms, body, and headdress. Their meaning would seem to be clear. In many ancient religions, snakes are associated with earth deities and male fertility. She seems oddly lacking in awesomeness, and the emphasis on the costume endows her with the secular, fashionable air. Slide, please. Our snake goddess dates from the beginning of the brief period between 1600 and 1450 BC, which produced almost everything we have of Minoan architecture, sculpture, and painting. After the catastrophe that had wiped out the earlier palaces, in a century of slow recovery, there was what seemed to our eyes an explosive increase in wealth and an equally remarkable outpouring of creative energy. The most surprising aspect of this sudden efflorescence, however, is its great achievement in painting. Slide, please. Between 2000 and 1700 BC, Crete had developed a type of pottery famous for its technical perfection and its dynamic swirling ornament. But this in no way prepares us for the naturalistic murals that cover the walls of the new palaces. Unfortunately, these paintings have survived only in small fragments, so that we hardly ever have a complete composition. Slide, please. A great many of them were scenes from nature showing animals and birds among luxuriant vegetation, or the creatures of the sea. Slide, please. In the remarkable fragment, we see a cat cautiously stalking a pheasant behind a bush. The flat forms, silhouetted against a background of solid color, recall Egyptian painting, and the acute observation of plants and animals also suggests Egyptian art. But if Minoan wall painting owes its origin to Egyptian influence, it betrays an attitude of mind, a sense of beauty very different from that of the Nile Valley. Slide, please. We find a passion for rhythmic, undulating movement, and the forms themselves have an oddly weightless quality. They seem to float or sway in a world without gravity, as if the scene took place underwater. The floating world of Minoan wall painting was an imaginative creation so rich and original that its influence can be felt throughout Minoan art during the era of the new palaces. Slide, please. In painted pottery, the abstract patterns of the old gave way to the new repertory of designs drawn from plant and animal life. Slide, please. Slide, please. Some vessels are covered entirely with fish, shells, octopuses, etc., as if the ocean itself had been caught within them. Slide, please. Along the southeastern shores of the Greek mainland, there existed during late Helladic, Helladic times, about 1600 to 1100 BC, a number of settlements corresponding in many ways to those of Minoan Crete. They too were grouped around palaces. Their inhabitants have become to be called Mycenaeans, after Mycena, Mycenae, the most important of these settlements. Slide, please. The works of art unearthed there by excavation often showed a strikingly Minoan character, the Mycenaeans were first regarded as having come from Crete, but it is now agreed that they were the descendants of the earliest Greek tribes who had entered the country soon after 2000 BC. The modest tombs of this period have yielded only some simple pottery and a few bronze weapons. Toward 1600 BC, however, they suddenly began to bury their dead in deep shaft graves and, a little later, in conical stone chambers known as beehive tombs. Slide, please. The royal dead were wrapped and sometimes preserved like Egyptian mummies, their faces covered by golden masks similar in purpose, if not in style, to the masks found in pharaonic tombs of the Middle and New Kingdoms. There was also a good deal of personal equipment, drinking vessels, jewelry, weapons, much of it gold, exquisite in workmanship. Slide, please. Some of these pieces, such as the magnificent gold vessel in the shape of a lion's head, show a boldly expressive style of smooth plains bounded by sharp ridges, which suggest contact with the Near East, while others are so Minoan in flavor that they might be imports from Crete. Of the later kind are the two famous gold cups from a tomb at Vafio. They must have been made about 1500 BC, slide, a few decades after the lion vessel. Slide, please. The men on the Vafio cups are not engaged in the Cretan bull vaulting game, but in the far more mundane business of catching the animals on the range. Slide, please. Once we realize this, we are also apt to notice that the design on the cup does not quite match the continuous rhythmic movements of Minoan compositions, and that the animals, for all their physical power, have the look of cattle rather than of sacred animals. Slide, please. Slide, please. In the 16th century BC, Mycena thus presents a strange picture. A sudden, powerful Egyptian influence on burial customs combined with an equally strong artistic influence from Crete, and with an extraordinary material wealth as expressed in the lavish use of gold. What we need is a triangular explanation that involves the Mycenaeans with Crete as well as Egypt about a century before the destruction of the new palaces. And such a theory, fascinating and plausible, has been taking shape in recent years. It runs about as follows. Slide, please. Between 1700 and 1580 BC, the Egyptians were trying to rid themselves of the Hyksos, who had sealed the Nile Delta. For this they gained the aid of warriors from Mycena, who returned home laden with gold, for which Egypt alone had an ample supply. And deeply impressed with Egyptian funerary customs, the Minoans, unmilitary but famous as sailors, ferried the Mycenaeans back and forth so that they, too, had a new and closer contact with Egypt, which may help to account for their sudden prosperity toward 1600 BC, as well as for the rapid development of naturalistic wall painting at that time. We may at this point recall the Trojan War immortalized in Homer's Iliad, which brought the Mycenaeans to Asia Minor soon after 1200 BC. It seems likely, however, that they began to sally eastward across the Aegean for trade or war much earlier than that date. Clear the machine, please. We will start our review with Egyptian architecture, the well-known pyramids, The Egyptians, using the pyramid structure built up from the early step pyramids, or the mastabas, into the grand structures of the pharaohs of the Old Kingdom. Not only in their tomb structure of the Old Kingdom with the pyramids, with the tombs built into the rock cliffs along the Nile, but also their temples, which has a circular enclosure, massive post and lintel construction based on nature designs. Slide, please. In their sculpture, they stuck closely to the form of the block. There is very little movement, not only in their sculpture, but also in their wall painting. They stylized the figure. It was for a certain purpose, that of holding the place for the ka, or the spirit, after the person died. Vacant spaces on the piece of sculpture were also used to tell the story of the pharaoh. Slide, please. In the wall painting, they decorate a flat surface with natural colored pigments. The body is turned in direction so that it is able to be seen most of. The head in profile, the eye full face, the shoulders turned so that both arms are visible, the hips turned back in profile, and then the legs in a walking position. This way all members of the body would be shown. This was absolutely necessary in the higher-ups and the deities and the pharaohs, although in some of the lower class people, especially the workers, they did not adhere to this because it was not strictly necessary to show all of them, and they were allowed to show more movement this way. Slide, please. Mesopotamian architecture is slightly limited since they used a sort of an adobe tile construction. All we have left of the great mounds of the temples are just the basic foundations. One element of architecture that they used that the Egyptians did not use was the glazed tile brick. And many of these were set in sort of a relief pattern where each brick was carved to form an animal, a figure, a design, and then was glazed with a brightly shiny colored chemical formula for our glaze. The cities must have been sparkling in the sun with all the rich color reflecting the light. Slide, please. There's not too much sculpture in the round of Mesopotamian other than of the leader Gadbois, which is a standing figure carved much in the Egyptian manner, sort of heavier in feeling, with clasped hands and the wool turban that shows the pattern of the wool design. Slide, please. But the most important works of the Mesopotamian culture are the palace relief carvings, which show the conquests, the conquers, the battles, the wars, the hunts of the kings. These are done in a fairly and powerful muscle structure. These are stylized to a degree, but they give the hint of power that was performed by these Assyrian people. Slide, please. In the third culture that we started, the Aegean, A-E-G-E-A-N, the first area was the Cycladic people from the island of Crete. And most of our art objects from them would be the idol figures, some in clay, some in stone, but a very sort of modern, contemporary look to them in a geometric type figure. Slide, please. Very few pieces of architecture are still existent of the Aegean culture. One of them is the tomb sculpture, the other, or the tomb architecture, which was a beehive shape. The other, the palace at Knossos, where the only architectural detail that could be identified would be the tapered column with the mushroom capital on top of the column, which were wood and were painted. But in the beehive tomb, you have strong, rough-hewn rock that is set in the elliptical shape, forming the shape of a beehive. The entrance was a lintel system that left a triangular opening as a pediment above the lintel that was then usually filled with some animal sculpture within the triangular device. Slide, please. And their utilitarian pottery that was with a free-flowing design. Sometimes it would be patterned out, but most of the time the artist would just start using a nature form or an animal form in earth colors of the browns, the rusts, the blacks, and free brush the design directly onto the piece of pottery, filling the space as he worked around the pottery. Slide, please. Clear the machine.